What happens when one of Hollywood's most iconic voices walks onto a daytime talk show and refuses to play by the rules? Sam Elliott, the man known for his legendary mustache, gravelly voice, and no-nonsense attitude, sat down on The View for what was supposed to be a friendly chat about his latest project. But within minutes, the conversation took a sharp turn that nobody saw coming. What started as a routine morning television segment quickly escalated into one of the most intense exchanges ever broadcast on daytime TV. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and by the end, security had to step in. Sam Elliott walked onto the set with that signature stride of his, the kind that makes you think of dusty western towns and showdowns at high noon. The audience erupted in applause as he made his way to the table, waving politely, but keeping that stoic expression he's known for. He settled into his seat, adjusting his jacket as the cameras zoomed in. Whoopi Goldberg began with the introductions, welcoming him warmly and highlighting his decades-long career in Hollywood. Sam nodded, thanking her with that deep, steady tone that has narrated countless commercials and brought unforgettable characters to life. Joy Behar jumped in almost immediately, skipping over small talk. She leaned forward, her smile tight, and asked about his recent comments in an interview where he discussed the changing landscape of Hollywood and how certain values seem to be shifting. Sam took a breath, clearly choosing his words carefully. He said he believed in authenticity, in telling stories that meant something, and that sometimes the industry lost sight of that in favor of what was trendy or politically convenient. Joy's smile faltered slightly. She asked him to clarify what he meant by politically convenient, her tone suggesting she already had a theory. Sam didn't flinch. He said that after decades in the business, he'd seen trends come and go, and that lately, the focus on checking boxes sometimes overshadowed the art of good storytelling. He added that he believed in treating everyone with respect, but that didn't mean he had to agree with every direction the industry was taking. The other hosts exchanged glances as the energy in the room shifted. Sonny Hostin stepped in, asking whether Sam thought diversity in storytelling was a problem. Sam shook his head, calm and steady. He said diversity wasn't the issue at all, that he'd worked with talented people from every background throughout his career. The real issue, he said, was when the story became secondary to the message, when writers and directors were more concerned with making a statement than creating something that resonated on a human level. Joy wasn't having it. She cut him off mid-sentence, her voice rising slightly as she pointed out that for decades, Hollywood had told the same kinds of stories from the same perspectives. Maybe, she said, Sam was just uncomfortable with the fact that new voices were finally getting their chance. Sam's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. He said he wasn't uncomfortable with anything except mediocrity, and that using diversity as a shield against criticism of poor storytelling was doing a disservice to everyone involved. The audience gasped, and Whoopi tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, asking Sam about his new film. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. She said that Sam's attitude represented what was wrong with the old guard of Hollywood, people who couldn't accept that times were changing. Sam turned to her, his eyes steady. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. He told Joy that he'd earned his place in the industry through hard work and dedication, not by tearing others down. He said he respected anyone who put in the effort to master their craft. But that respect had to go both ways. He wasn't going to apologize for having an opinion, especially not on a show that claimed to value different viewpoints. Joy laughed, but it was sharp and dismissive. She said that having an opinion was one thing, but using a platform to diminish the struggles of marginalized communities was another. Sam's voice dropped even lower. Calm, but with a dangerous edge. He said he hadn't diminished anyone's struggles, only pointed out that quality should matter more than optics. Then he asked her directly if she thought audiences were stupid, if she really believed people couldn't tell the difference between a story told well and one told to fill a quota. The tension was unbearable now. Ana Navarro suggested they cut to a commercial, but Joy waved her off. She said that Sam's comments were offensive, and that maybe he wasn't the right person to be speaking on these issues. Sam leaned back, crossing his arms. He said he'd been speaking his mind for over 50 years, and he wasn't about to stop now, especially not because someone on a talk show told him to. Joy's face flushed red. She said that The View was her show, and that she and her co-hosts had every right to challenge guests who spread outdated and harmful rhetoric. Sam raised an eyebrow, almost amused. He asked when honest conversation became harmful. When sharing a professional opinion based on decades of experience became something that needed to be silenced. He told her that if she couldn't handle a guest who didn't agree with her, maybe she should stick to interviewing people who would nod along and tell her what she wanted to hear. The audience was split, some clapping for Sam's defiance, others stunned into silence. Whoopi again tried to calm things down, reminding everyone that The View was about open dialogue. But Joy wasn't backing off. She said there was a difference between debate and disrespect, and that Sam had crossed that line. For the first time, Sam's voice rose. He said the only line being crossed was the one where people weren't allowed to have honest conversations anymore, without being labeled or attacked. Joy stood up, pointing at him, saying she didn't have to sit there and be lectured by someone who didn't understand the realities of the modern world. Sam stayed seated, meeting her gaze with that unshakable calm. He told her she was proving his point, that instead of engaging with what he was actually saying, she was resorting to theatrics and accusations. And that was when the studio descended into chaos. Sam said that was the problem with so much of modern discourse. People were more interested in performing outrage than actually listening. That was apparently the final straw. Joy turned to the producers off camera and said she wanted Sam removed from the set. The audience erupted in a mix of boos and cheers as the studio descended into chaos. Whoopi was trying to restore order, her voice barely audible over the noise. Sam just sat there, calm as ever, waiting to see what would happen next. Security personnel began moving toward the table, and the other hosts exchanged looks of disbelief. Sarah Haynes was visibly upset, saying this wasn't how things should be handled, that they could work it out. But Joy was adamant. She said Sam had been disrespectful, and that she wouldn't continue the show with him present. Sam finally stood up, slow and deliberate. He looked at Joy, then at the cameras, and said that this was exactly what he'd been talking about. That the moment someone challenged the narrative, they were shut down and pushed out. He thanked Whoopi for the invitation and apologized to her specifically for how things had turned out, making it clear he didn't blame her for the situation. As security reached him, Sam raised his hands in a gesture of calm compliance. He wasn't going to resist. He simply gathered his composure, straightened his jacket, and prepared to leave. But before he could take a step, Joy made one more comment. She said that maybe this would teach him that actions have consequences, that he couldn't just say whatever he wanted without facing repercussions. Sam stopped in his tracks. He turned around slowly, and the look on his face made everyone in the studio fall silent. Even the audience seemed to sense that something important was about to happen. Sam looked directly at Joy, his voice low but steady enough for every microphone to catch. He told her she had just proven his point, that she couldn't handle dissent, so she used her power to silence it. He said that wasn't strength. It was fear masquerading as authority. Joy's mouth fell open, clearly not expecting that response. She sputtered for a moment before finding her words again. She said Sam was twisting the situation, making himself out to be a victim when he was the one who came on the show with an agenda. Sam's eyebrows lifted slightly. He asked what agenda she thought he had, given that he'd simply answered the question she'd asked. He said if she didn't want honest answers, she shouldn't have asked the questions in the first place. Whoopi stepped in firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. She told everyone to take a breath and remember that they were professionals. She suggested that maybe Sam and Joy could find some common ground if they just listened to each other for a moment. Sam nodded at Whoopi respectfully, saying he was willing to listen if Joy was. All eyes turned to Joy, who stood with her arms crossed, clearly wrestling with what to do next. Joy finally spoke, her tone still heated but slightly more controlled. She said she would listen, but that Sam needed to understand why his words were problematic. She explained that people in marginalized communities had fought for decades to have their stories told, and that when someone like Sam, someone with privilege and a powerful platform, dismissed those efforts as checking boxes, it undermined that struggle. Sam listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he responded in a tone that was measured but no less firm. He said he understood the fight for representation, that he'd witnessed it throughout his career and supported it in his own way. But he maintained that there was a difference between supporting diverse voices and accepting subpar work simply because it came from a diverse voice. Holding everyone to the same standard of excellence, he said, was the real sign of respect, not lowering the bar and calling it progress. Joy shook her head, saying Sam was creating a false equivalence, acting as if the playing field had ever been level. She pointed out that for every person of color, woman, or LGBTQ storyteller who finally got a chance to share their perspective, there were dozens who didn't, simply because the gatekeepers didn't think their stories were marketable. She said that maybe some of the work Sam dismissed as subpar was simply different from what he was used to, and that his discomfort was more about his own limitations than the quality of the art itself. That struck a nerve. Sam's jaw tightened as he took a step forward, not in aggression, but in conviction. He told Joy that she didn't know him, didn't know what he'd seen, who he'd worked with, or what he valued. He said she was making assumptions based solely on the fact that he'd voiced an opinion she didn't agree with. He asked whether that was really the standard now, that anyone who questioned the prevailing narrative was automatically labeled as close-minded or bigoted. The audience was completely riveted, some nodding in agreement, others clearly uncomfortable. Sunny Hostin jumped back in, her legal background evident in her approach. She asked Sam if he could name specific examples of poor storytelling being excused because of diversity initiatives. Sam paused, clearly weighing his response. He said he wasn't going to call out specific projects. That wasn't his point. His point, he said, was that criticism had become taboo if the subject matter involved certain protected categories. Joy scoffed, saying criticism had always existed and always would, but that Sam needed to examine why he felt so threatened by change. She suggested that maybe his real issue wasn't with quality at all, but with the fact that stories about white cowboys and rugged individualism were no longer the default. Sam's eyes narrowed. He said Joy was putting words in his mouth, attributing motives he'd never expressed. That, he said, was exactly the kind of bad faith argument that made real conversation impossible. Anna Navarro stepped in, trying to calm the storm. She said that perhaps both Sam and Joy had valid points, that representation and quality didn't have to be an either-or discussion. Sam nodded, appreciating her diplomacy. He said he agreed that both things mattered. But before he could finish, Joy cut Anna off, ready to fire back again. Joy said that Sam had made it very clear where his priorities lay, and that trying to both sides the issue was missing the point entirely. Sam's patience was wearing thin. He told Joy that she seemed determined to make him into a villain no matter what he said, that she'd already decided who he was before he even sat down. He said that kind of prejudgment was ironic, coming from someone who claimed to champion open-mindedness and acceptance. Joy's face reddened. She snapped back that Sam had no right to lecture her about prejudgment when his entire argument was rooted in nostalgia for a time when people like her had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. The exchange had shifted from professional disagreement to something raw and personal. Sam replied that he'd never claimed the past was perfect. He said he knew Hollywood had a long history of discrimination and exclusion, but the solution to past wrongs wasn't to swing the pendulum so far in the other direction that merit became secondary. Everyone, he said, deserved a fair shot. But once you got that shot, the work had to speak for itself. Joy challenged him on that point, asking who got to decide what merit even meant. For decades, she said, those decisions had been made by a very specific group of people with a narrow worldview. Maybe, she argued, Sam was just uncomfortable that the criteria were finally expanding. Sam responded that audiences ultimately decided that no amount of critical acclaim or awards could make people connect with something that didn't resonate on a genuine emotional level. Whoopi stepped in, pointing out that audiences were now more diverse than ever, and that what resonated with one group might not resonate with another. She said that was a good thing, that it meant more people could see themselves reflected in the stories being told. Sam nodded, saying he agreed completely. He said he had no problem with specific perspectives or niche audiences. His issue, he repeated, was when the focus on representation overshadowed the focus on craft. That set Joy off again. She said Sam kept coming back to the same condescending idea, that diverse storytelling was somehow less skilled or less worthy. Sam's voice rose to meet hers. He said that wasn't what he was saying at all, that she was deliberately misinterpreting him. He said there were brilliant filmmakers and writers from every background imaginable, and that he'd been honored to work with many of them. But there were also mediocre ones, just like there were plenty of mediocre white male filmmakers. Pretending otherwise, he said, helped no one. The studio was in chaos now. Audience members were shouting, some cheering for Sam, others for Joy. The other hosts looked overwhelmed, unsure how to regain control. Sarah Haynes was nearly in tears, saying that this wasn't productive, that they were all talking past each other. But neither Sam nor Joy seemed ready to back down. Joy took a deep breath and shifted her tone slightly. She told Sam that she understood he felt attacked, but that sometimes people needed to hear hard truths about their blind spots. She said maybe the conversation was uncomfortable for him, because it was forcing him to confront things about himself and his career he hadn't wanted to examine. Sam shook his head slowly, a bitter smile forming on his face. He said the only thing this conversation had forced him to confront was how little nuance existed anymore. Everything, he said, had to be black or white, good or bad, with us or against us. There was no room for complexity, no space to say that two things could be true at once. He said he could support diversity and still question execution. He could acknowledge past injustices and still critique present approaches. But according to Joy, that made him the enemy. Joy wasn't about to let that stand. She said Sam was once again playing the victim, acting as if he was being persecuted for simply having an opinion. She pointed out that he'd had a long, successful career in an industry that had been very good to him, and that maybe he should show a little gratitude instead of complaining about how things were changing. Sam's expression hardened. He said gratitude didn't mean silence, that being successful didn't obligate him to endorse things he didn't believe in. The argument had reached a fever pitch. Whoopi was calling for another commercial break, her voice barely audible over the shouting. Security hovered at the edge of the stage, unsure whether to step in. Sam and Joy stood locked in a silent staring contest, neither willing to look away. And then something unexpected happened. A voice from the audience shouted out, "Why can't you both be right?" The question cut through the noise like a blade, freezing everyone in place. The entire studio went silent. An audience member, an older woman sitting in the third row, stood up and repeated herself. She said that maybe Sam and Joy were both right, that perhaps the problem wasn't that either of them was wrong, but that they were talking about different things entirely. The camera swung toward her, and you could see the surprise on everyone's faces, including Sam and Joy. Whoopi seized the opportunity, asking the woman to elaborate. The woman said that Sam seemed to be talking about artistic standards and creative integrity, while Joy was talking about access and opportunity. She explained that those weren't opposing ideas, that you could care about both without diminishing either. She looked at Sam and said she understood his concern about quality, but then turned to Joy and said she also understood the frustration of watching doors stay closed for people who deserved a chance. For a moment, there was complete silence. Sam was the first to respond. He thanked the woman and said that was the most sensible thing anyone had said all morning. He admitted that maybe he hadn't articulated his position as clearly as he should have, that in trying to make his point, he'd left room for misinterpretation. But he maintained that his core argument still stood. Excellence should never be sacrificed, regardless of who was creating the work. Joy looked conflicted, clearly not ready to concede entirely, but also recognizing that the woman had made a valid observation. She said she appreciated the audience member's perspective, but still felt Sam's framing of the issue was problematic. She argued that when someone in his position expressed concerns about quality in the context of diversity initiatives, it sent a message, intentional or not, that diverse voices were inherently less capable. Sam's shoulders sagged slightly, a sign of exhaustion rather than defeat. He said he understood how his words could be interpreted that way, but that wasn't his intent. He asked Joy directly what she wanted him to say. What combination of words would convey his actual beliefs without being misconstrued as an attack on diversity? Joy paused, caught off guard by the directness of the question. She thought for a moment before responding. She said that maybe the issue was that Sam focused too much on the negative, on the examples he thought didn't measure up, rather than celebrating the incredible work being done by diverse creators. She suggested that if he used his platform to highlight the excellent storytelling coming from underrepresented voices, people might be more receptive to his critiques when he did offer them. Sam nodded slowly, considering her words. He said that was fair, that he probably did focus too much on what frustrated him rather than what inspired him. But he pushed back slightly, saying that celebrating the good didn't mean ignoring the mediocre, and that honest criticism was a form of respect, not disrespect. He said, if you really believed in someone's potential, you held them to high standards rather than making excuses for them. Sonny Hostin jumped in, saying that the problem with that logic was that diverse creators often faced harsher criticism than their white counterparts, that they weren't given the same grace or room to fail and grow.